16 Rust Belt towns with $300 rent. But here's the catch. You know what's funny? People on the coasts will complain about paying $3,000 a month for a studio apartment with a kitchen the size of a bathtub. And then someone will mention you can rent an entire house in Ohio for $300 a month. And they'll look at you like you just told them about a magical portal to Narnia. Except here's the thing. That $300 house exists. It's real. You can absolutely move to Youngstown or Saginaw or one of a dozen other Rust Belt towns and pay less for rent than most people pay for their car insurance. But there's always a catch. Actually, there are multiple catches. And those catches involve things like lead paint, crime rates that would make a sociologist weep, job markets that died in 1983, and the general vibe of living in a place that America forgot about and never came back for. So today we're going through 16 Rust Belt towns where rent is absurdly cheap, like almost free, and we're going to talk about what you're actually getting for that price. Because nothing in life is free, and $300 rent definitely isn't. Let's get into it. Here's why these places exist and why the rent is so cheap. The Rust Belt collapsed. Steel mills closed. Auto plants shut down. Manufacturing disappeared. And entire cities built around one or two major industries just died. Not slowly, either fast. Within a generation, places that had 100,000 people were down to 30,000. And the people who stayed were the ones who couldn't afford to leave. When population crashes like that, housing supply massively exceeds demand. You've got houses built for factory workers in 1950. Those workers are gone. Their kids left. And now you've got a 3-bedroom house that nobody wants. So landlords drop the rent, and drop it, and drop it, until they hit a floor where someone, anyone, will take it. That floor is around $300 to $400 a month in a lot of these places. Now, before you start thinking this is your ticket to affordable living, understand what you're getting. These aren't cute little affordable towns with farmers markets and good schools. These are economically devastated places with high crime, terrible infrastructure, environmental hazards, and basically no jobs unless you want to work at Dollar General. The people who live there are mostly stuck there. They can't afford to leave. They're trapped by poverty, by family obligations, by lack of options. And if you move there thinking you're getting a deal, you're going to learn very quickly why rent is $300. But let's go through them, because this is fascinating in a dark, dystopian kind of way. Number 16, East Cleveland, Ohio. Starting with a place that's technically its own city, but really just Cleveland's nightmare suburb. You can find apartments in East Cleveland for $300 to $400 a month. Entire houses for $500 to $600. It sounds amazing until you realize East Cleveland is one of the highest crime rates in Ohio and a poverty rate over 40%. The housing stock is old. Lead paint is a real concern. The schools are struggling, and the city itself is broke and can't provide basic services. East Cleveland is what happens when white flight, economic collapse, and municipal bankruptcy have a baby. It's cheap because nobody with options wants to live there. East Cleveland is where Cleveland sends its problems. Number 15, Gary, Indiana. Gary is famous for being the poster child of Rust Belt decay, and rent reflects that. You can rent a house in Gary for $300 to $500 a month, sometimes less. The city used to have 180,000 people. Now it's under 70,000. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned. Gary's crime rate is terrible. The city is financially insolvent. Infrastructure is crumbling. And there are no jobs unless you commute to Chicago, which is an hour away if traffic cooperates, which it doesn't. Gary is cheap because Gary is dying. And living there means accepting that you're in a place that peaked in 1960 and has been declining ever since. Gary is where the American dream went to die and left a corpse. Number 14, Flint, Michigan. Ah yes, Flint. Famous for poisoning its own water supply. Rent in Flint is cheap. $300 to $500 a month for an apartment. $600 to $800 for a house. But Flint is Flint. The water crisis supposedly got fixed, but trust is gone. The city is poor, crime is high, and the auto industry jobs that built Flint are never coming back. Flint has people trying to revitalize it. There are good neighborhoods, but overall, it's a hard place to live. and the cheap rent reflects that. Flint is where you can afford housing, but might not be able to afford clean water. Number 13. Saginaw, Michigan. Saginaw is another Michigan city that got destroyed by auto industry collapse. Rent here is $300 to $400 for a basic apartment, $500 to $700 for a house. The city lost 60,000 people since the 1960s. Crime is elevated. The job market is weak, and the schools are underfunded. Saginaw isn't the worst place on this list. It's functional. People live normal lives there, but it's not thriving. It's surviving, and cheap rent is one of the only things it has to offer. Saginaw is where cheap housing meets economic stagnation. Number 12. Youngstown, Pennsylvania. Youngstown is famous for a flood in 1889. It should probably be more famous for economic decline. Rent is $300 to $450 for apartments, $600 to $800 for houses. Youngstown's population peaked at over 60,000 and is now under 20,000. The steel industry is gone. Coal is gone. And what's left is a small city with not much going on. Youngstown has good people and some nice architecture, but it's isolated, economically depressed, and the winters are brutal. Cheap rent is the compensation for living somewhere that America forgot. Youngstown is where industry died and never got replaced. Number 11. Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown is the quintessential Rust Belt disaster story. You can rent in Youngstown for $300 to $500 a month. The city lost over half its population since 1970. Steel mills closed. Jobs disappeared. And the people left behind are struggling. Crime in Youngstown is a serious problem. The city is broke. Schools are underfunded. And there's just not much economic opportunity unless you're willing to commute elsewhere. Youngstown is Youngstown State University, which provides some stability. But overall, it's a city in permanent decline. And $300 rent is what you pay to live in permanent decline. Youngstown is where the steel industry died and took the city with it. Number 10. Binghamton, New York. Binghamton is upstate New York's contribution to Rust Belt misery. Rent here is around $350 to $500 for apartments, $700 to $1,000 for houses, which is higher than some other places on this list, but still cheap for New York. Binghamton used to be a manufacturing hub. IBM had a major presence. That's gone now. The city is economically stagnant. Winters are long and depressing, and the population has been declining slowly. Binghamton isn't terrible. It's just not good. And cheap rent is basically the only reason anyone who's not from there would move there. Binghamton is where upstate New York goes to be forgotten. Number 9. Wheeling, West Virginia. Wheeling sits right on the Ohio border and has been declining for decades. Rent is $50 to $400 for apartments, $500 to $700 for houses. Wheeling used to be a steel and manufacturing town. Those days are gone. Now it's got around 25,000 people and not much economy. The city has some nice historic architecture and sits on the Ohio River, which is pretty. But there are no jobs. The area is economically depressed, and West Virginia overall is struggling. Wheeling is cheap because there's no reason to live there unless you're already there and can't leave. Wheeling is where the Ohio River meets economic despair. Number 8. Muncie, Indiana. Muncie is famous for being studied by sociologists as Middletown, a typical American city. Now it's a typical declining American city. Rent is $300 to $450 for apartments, $600 to $800 for houses. Ball State University is there, which provides some economic activity. But the city lost its manufacturing base and never recovered. Muncie's population is declining. The job market is weak outside the university. And the city has all the problems of Rust Belt decline without being big enough to have many resources. Muncie is fine if you're a student or work at the university. Otherwise, it's just a place where rent is cheap because nobody particularly wants to live there. Muncie is where the middle of America went to decline. Number 7. Lima, Ohio. Lima is a small Ohio city that got hollowed out by deindustrialization. Rent here is $300 to $400 for apartments, $500 to $700 for houses. The city lost half its population. Crime is elevated. The job market is weak, and there's just not much going on. Lima has a tank plant that still operates, which provides some jobs. But overall, the city is struggling. The cheap rent is basically the only selling point. Lima is where affordable housing meets, but why would I want to live there? Number 6. Steubenville, Ohio. Steubenville is right on the West Virginia border and has been dying slowly for decades. Rent is $50 to $400 for basic apartments. The city's down to under 20,000 people. Steel mills are gone, and what's left is a small, declining city with high poverty and not much economic activity. Steubenville is where Ohio meets West Virginia in a race to the bottom. The cheap rent reflects the lack of demand. Nobody moves to Steubenville. People leave Steubenville. Steubenville is where the Rust Belt rusted through completely. Number 5. East St. Louis, Illinois. East St. Louis is one of the most economically devastated places in America. Rent can be as low as $200 to $300 a month. The city is basically broke. Crime is extremely high. Poverty is endemic. Most of the city is abandoned. East St. Louis is not a place you move to. It's a place you're trapped in. Housing is barely habitable, and the city is genuinely dangerous. East St. Louis is where affordable rent meets urban collapse. Number 4. Braddock, Pennsylvania. Braddock is a tiny borough outside Pittsburgh, famous for urban decay. Rent here is incredibly cheap. Population dropped from over 20,000 to under 2,000. Most of the town is abandoned. Buildings and empty lots. Braddock got attention from artists trying to revitalize it, but it's still a place with no economy, high poverty, and limited services. Braddock is where you can rent cheap if you're okay living in a near-ghost town. Number 3. Cairo, Illinois. Cairo is at the southern tip of Illinois where its rivers meet. It's also basically abandoned. Rent is dirt cheap when you can find it. Population dropped from 15,000 to 2,000. Most of the city is empty. No jobs, barely any infrastructure. Cairo is a ghost town that technically still exists. Live there cheap if you don't mind living. Somewhere society abandoned decades ago. Cairo is where cheap rent meets existential loneliness. Number 2. McKeesport, Pennsylvania. McKeesport, outside Pittsburgh, used to be a steel town. Now it's a cautionary tale. Rent is $300 to $400 for apartments, $600 for a house. City lost 70% population. Crime is serious. Poverty is high. No job market. McKeesport, technically affordable, but living there means accepting dysfunction and risk. McKeesport is where cheap rent means expensive problems. Number 1. Cleveland's East Side. At number 1, the cheapest and most problematic rent situation. We have certain neighborhoods on Cleveland's East Side you can find rent for $250 to $350 a month. These are areas with extreme poverty, high crime, abandoned houses on every block, and basically no services or amenities. This isn't all of Cleveland's East Side. There are good neighborhoods. But the areas with this cheap rent are places where even locals tell you not to go. The housing is often in terrible condition. Lead paint, mold, structural issues, and the neighborhoods are genuinely dangerous. This is as cheap as rent gets in America, and there's a reason it's this cheap. Cleveland's ultra-cheap East Side is where affordable rent meets genuine urban crisis. So what does all this actually mean? First, cheap rent exists. It's real. You can absolutely live for $300 or $400 a month if you're willing to accept certain trade-offs. Those trade-offs involve crime, poor schools, environmental hazards, no jobs, and generally living in a place that's economically devastated. Second, the people living in these places aren't there because rent is cheap. They're there because they're stuck. They can't afford to move. They have family ties. They lack resources to relocate. And they're making the best of a bad situation. Third, if you're considering moving to one of these places as a cost-saving measure, really think it through. Yes, rent is cheap, but what about your job? Healthcare, safety, quality of life? Are you saving money if you can't work or your car keeps getting broken into? Fourth, some of these places might recover, maybe, with the right investment and policies, but most of them won't. They've been declining for 50 years, and there's no reason to think that will reverse. And fifth, this is a tragedy. These were thriving communities. They built America, and then America moved on and left them behind. The cheap rent is a symptom of abandonment and collapse. So there you have it. 16 Rust Belt towns where you can rent an entire house for less than most people spend on groceries. It sounds like a deal. It sounds like a way to escape expensive cities and live affordably. And for some people, in some circumstances, it might work. If you're remote work enabled, if you're okay with isolation, if you can handle the risk and the dysfunction, maybe you can make it work. But for most people, cheap rent in these places is cheap for a reason. And that reason is that living there comes with costs that aren't measured in dollars. These towns are real. The people living there are real. And the struggles are real. This isn't a joke or an adventure. It's American economic collapse playing out in slow motion over decades. So here's my question for you. If someone offered you free rent, completely free, but you had to live in one of these towns for a year, would you do it? What would it take for you to consider it? Let me know in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious how people think about these trade-offs. And if you found this depressing but enlightening, maybe consider subscribing. We talk about housing markets, economic realities, and the places that don't show up in travel guides. Someone has to document the decline. Might as well be me.